Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole White, and I am the Executive Director of Rare New England. Welcome to our Spring 2024 Genetic Career Pathways Forum. Excuse me. Just looking at, oh, wrong one. Sorry. Oh, gosh. Okay. Excuse me. So sorry. Not sure what happened here. But I'm just going to share my screen here. So our mission is to bring together New England patients, families, and providers touched by rare and complex disorders. We offer educational opportunities, create awareness of available resources, and build foundations for support to improve patient quality of life and support the professional needs of healthcare providers. Tonight, you'll be hearing from our amazing host, Dr. Kritzer, and you'll see our also amazing, equally as amazing guest speakers. We have Dr. Michelle Spencer-Manson, Dr. Gerald Cox, and Dr. Brian Skotko. I'm going to also take a minute to thank our sponsors for this evening's program. We have the New England Regional Genetics Network, as well as Ultragenyx, Vertex, and Spark. I'm going to start by introducing Dr. Kritzer, as is an attending in the Division of Genetics and Genomics at Boston Children's Hospital. She graduated from Albert Einstein College of Medicine in Bronx, New York. She did her pediatrics residency at the Floating Hospital for Children at the residency at the Floating Hospital for Children at Tufts Medical Center in Boston, Massachusetts, and then completed fellowships in clinical genetics and medical biochemical genetics at Boston Children's Hospital.
Thank you, Nicole, and welcome to everybody. We have just a record number of folks joining us today. We're really excited to get to share what we are all truly feel blessed to do as in a career in medical genetics. I'm noticing some folks taking the opportunity to put comments in the chat. Certainly, if you have questions that come up as you're going through this, feel free to throw those in the chat. We're going to hear from everyone, and then we will have time to do some question and answer where we will take those from the chat or from ones that were previously submitted. So as Nicole said, I'm Dr. Amy Kritzer. I was trained in pediatrics and clinical genetics and medical biochemical genetics, and am currently the clinical director at Boston Children's Hospital in the Division of Genetics and Genomics. And I really, when I think back to my career and what brought me to this field, I really wanted my career to focus on the care of children with complex medical needs and supporting them and their families. And that really, I thought about lots of different ways to do that. And really what I came to realize is it was the kids with metabolic diseases and genetic disorders that I really felt were the patient population I most wanted to work with. And I so enjoy getting to support and advocate these children and their families every day. And I just want to welcome you all so that you can hear a little bit from some of us on why we do what we do. So why are we doing this tonight? Genetics is impacting almost every area of medicine. As you can imagine, there is a growing need for geneticists in the country and abroad, as well as for providers who support patients with genetic disorders across all disciplines, and not just physicians, but social work, psychology, nutrition, genetic counseling, administrative teams. So there really are just patients who need us in all areas. And so genetics really is something that is just getting more and more embedded in what we do in healthcare. And patients and families may come to a genetics clinic because they're looking for a diagnosis. They may be looking to end a diagnostic odyssey, looking for information about a disease they know they have or that they know runs in their family. They may be looking for prognosis information to help for the future. Sometimes we have families who are looking for information about risks for if they were to have children based on genetic information, and also what effective therapies are now available for genetic disorders, which has become just an increasingly exciting part of our field. There are over 7,000 rare diseases. Many, but not all of them are genetic, and this list grows every day. And there's a lot of information that needs to be shared, and the impact of genetics is not just in rare disease, but in throughout healthcare. Genetic impacts how we manifest disease, how we respond to disease, how we utilize medications, what medications might be effective or safe, and what therapies are possible for treating different disorders. So tonight you're going to hear from 3 geneticists who have had a tremendous experience in this field, and they're going to share their path to the field of genetics, the patient populations that they work to treat and care for, and how this experience has impacted their own lives. And then, as I mentioned, we will have a question and answer session that will follow these 3 presentations. So thank you to those who submitted questions ahead of time. And thank you to anyone who is going to submit questions. We may not get around to all the questions, but Rare New England can facilitate passing along questions or contact information if you need that. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Dr. Brian Skotko to introduce himself and to share his phenomenal story of his career in genetics.
Thank you, Dr. Kritzer. It's so great to be with all of you today. I thought the best way to describe what a clinical geneticist is from my point of view is just to describe a couple of my days to give you a sense of what I do. So just a bit of a background. I'm originally from Ohio in the United States, and then I went to school at Duke University in North Carolina. From there, I went to Harvard Medical School to complete my medical school education. And I also was interested in public policy, where I completed a master's in public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School. After that, I did a residency in pediatrics, and then I followed that with a fellowship in medical genetics. After that, I became an attending at Massachusetts General Hospital, where I've been for over a decade. But I wanted to rewind that story, and my dream job was to be able to run and direct a clinic for and with people with Down syndrome. And I have that dream job because it was inspired by someone special in my life, and that is my younger sister, Kristen, who has Down syndrome. So because of her, I wanted to go into medicine, and I wanted to be able to develop a clinic for and with people with Down syndrome. And so Kristen's to thank for all of that. Many of you may have genetics play a personal role in your lives, and my take-home lesson number 1 is let that fuel your passions. Genetics is a field where, yes, we are compensated fine, but we're also overly compensated when it comes to fulfillment and to meaning, and to the extent that you could apply and target your personal passions into professional ones, it goes a long way. So what do I do on a regular basis? Let me describe a little bit about our Down syndrome clinic. Those who are medical geneticists within an academic hospital oftentimes really focus on one particular condition and build out a clinic around there. So mine is Down syndrome that I focus on, but I have colleagues who also have a Turner syndrome clinic or who have a Williams syndrome clinic, et cetera. And this is where we become super specialized. We're not making the diagnosis. People already come to us with the diagnosis, but we're making sure that we maximize their health and wellness based on the medical guidelines that are in place for people with that condition. So tomorrow, let's walk through my day tomorrow. So tomorrow when I wake up, I am going to be at work at 7:30 a.m. in the morning, because it's there for the next 30 minutes. My multidisciplinary team and I are going to do what's called a huddle. So this is where the social worker, nutritionist, physical therapist, occupational therapist, speech therapist, the person with Down syndrome who works in our clinic, our administrative staff, and also myself will review all of the patients that we have coming in that day. We have prepared in advance, sometimes upwards to 2 hours per clinic per provider, to say, what does the patient need today? We reviewed their intake notes, we reviewed their clinic notes, and we come prepared. So at 7:30 tomorrow morning, I will have to be prepared to go through those patients. And it's an opportunity to really make sure that we're all synchronized and we're all taking a piece of the puzzle. Then during the morning from 8 o'clock to noon, we will be rotating and seeing our patients. Each patient sees us for about 45 minutes, and they rotate between different providers. So I'll see the patient, the social worker will see the patient, the nutritionist will see the patient, physical therapist, et cetera. And then during that, between all those visits, I'm also educating. So we're really fortunate to have medical residents, so doctors in their trainings. We have students, we have genetic counselor students, we have college students who are rotating through and learning with us and being able to observe. So I'm doing some teaching on the fly, if you will, and teaching between them. At noon, after we've seen all of those patients, it will be time for us to go to our offices. And on Tuesday, it's one of my favorite days because that's when we have our team lunch. So now that we exist in a hybrid world, our team has felt it's so important for us to see each other in person at least once a week, and we all get together in the cafeteria that's near our offices, and we share 30 minutes where we don't talk about medicine. We're able just to catch up on each other and be able to see how each other are doing. And it's really a great shared moment to be able to know the colleagues that you're working with, because when the work gets tough, it's helpful to know each other's background and to support each other. From there, I will go into an hour meeting where I will oversee now our clinical research team. So I spend a lot of my time doing clinical research or translational research. This doesn't mean I'm not pipetting, I'm not working with animal models, but I am working on research that comes from the issues that we see in clinic. So for example, many of my patients with Down syndrome have obstructive sleep apnea. This is when they're not getting enough oxygen when they're sleeping at night. And so the treatment for that typically is, well, to remove your tonsils and adenoid, but sometimes the sleep apnea comes back, and the next treatment for that is to wear a sleep mask. But sometimes our patients with Down syndrome just cannot and will not tolerate that CPAP mask. And so I encountered this as a dilemma. I had patients with Down syndrome who had severe obstructive sleep apnea that was affecting their IQ, and we had run out of options. And so as a clinician on the ground, I saw there was this big need. And so it's in partnering with my colleagues. We have an ears, nose, and throat surgeon at our hospital, and he and I saw a new technology that came out called the hypoglossal nerve stimulator, which is a technology to help improve sleep apnea. But together, we were able to apply for a grant to the government. The government, the NIH in this case, gave us that grant competitively. And now we have a clinical trial that we're implementing to give an option to people with Down syndrome who have severe obstructive sleep apnea who ordinarily wouldn't have that. And so this in the afternoon is one of several projects that I and my team of clinical research assistants will go through and say, okay, what do we need to do on this one? What's up to date on this one? Just to make sure we're all synchronized. So it's been really fun to develop a portfolio of research opportunities with my colleagues, but they all come and generate from the unanswered clinical questions that we encounter in clinic. When that hour meeting is over, I will then be meeting with our team's social workers, which I do once a week, in order for us to give the best possible clinical care to people in person. We need to make sure that we follow up and coordinate their care. And oftentimes that's, have you read this book? Or do you know about this conference? Or can I connect you to this mother? Or have you applied for this governmental resource? And so by working with our social workers, we're able to give those patients those needs and extend the type of service I'm able to provide. Well, on a weekly basis, we're reviewing what sort of cracks are in the infrastructure, how do we make a difference, what sort of changes are needed within our system to continue to make sure we're performing at our max capacity. And that is what I'm meeting with in the afternoon with those clinical researchers. Then I will have some time to answer some emails, and then it comes time to writing those clinical notes. So after you see patients, you got to write up their notes in order to document it, in order to bill for insurance for that efforts for the hospital, and also be able to have notes go back to the family so they could remember what did we talk about and how are we going to do something with that. Then I'll have a little time right before the day ends in order to work on writing projects. So as we're working on research papers, we also need to review them. And I have several different manuscripts in process working with colleagues and others, and I've reserved some time in the afternoon to be able to review a colleague's draft and to provide some feedback and editing. I love these days where it's every day is a little bit different. And so the next day is going to be a little bit different than that. But I'm just trying to give you a scope. No one day is all seeing patients. No one day for me is all teaching. No one day for me is all doing research. It's a little bit of multiple pieces of the pie crammed into every day, which is the way I like it. I also feel it's important to have a work-life balance, which is one of the big reasons why I chose medical genetics. I don't respond well to when anyone could page me at any hours of the day. So I like when I'm off, I'm off. Tomorrow is a special day because it's the day that I play squash, which is a sport I love. I'm not good at it, but I'm trying to get better at it. And so in the evening, I'll go to the gym before heading home, and I'll be able to have my exercise. And then I'll head home, and we'll have dinner with my wife and do some reading and get ready for the next day. So that's a little bit in the day of the life of me. The main take-home points I hope you take home from this is, one, if there is a personal reason that fuels your passion for genetics, honor that and perhaps fuel that. career in academic medicine, where your position within a hospital and academic medical center is fulfilling, but is very hard work. Oftentimes, you need to create your salary by not only seeing patients, but applying for grants and doing grants. But to the extent that you do it and you are able to do it, my other lesson as a take home is very fulfilling. Thank you for listening. And Dr. Kritzer, I'll toss it back to you.
Thank you so much for sharing your clinic structure, your style, your patient population with us. I personally have gotten an opportunity to spend some time in Dr. Skotko's clinic, and it really is a phenomenal, just group of individuals dedicated to caring for those patients. So thank you so much, Dr. Skotko. I'm now going to invite Dr. Jerry Cox to share with us his journey to the field of genetics, which has taken several different twists and turns. And he's had so much incredible knowledge to share with so many of us. And I'm excited for you to get to hear from him now.
Thanks, Amy. My career has had a number of twists and turns. Growing up, I was one of 6 siblings, grew up in Andover, Massachusetts. And I had a younger brother, 11 years younger than me. And I found myself really enjoying being around young children and seeing the world through their eyes. And as I thought about what I wanted to do for a career, I really started leaning towards pediatrics. However, I also liked scientific research. And so after graduating college, I attended UCSD in San Diego as an MD PhD student, where I could really combine my 2 interests in medicine and research. And while there, I became interested in cell biology and learned how to do laboratory research. But I have to say, I was really influenced by a lot of the professors at UCSD that were studying various genetic diseases, trying to figure out what caused them. And some of these diseases had such unusual combinations of features. There were neurodegenerative disorders that caused storage in patients, like the mucopolysaccharidoses. There were conditions where upon exposure to the skin, patients would develop cancer like xeroderma pigmentosa. And then there were patients with sickle cell disease that developed pain crises. And I was really fascinated by what could give rise to all these really very different medical disorders. So after I finished my training in San Diego, I came to Boston to pursue a pediatrics residency, and then focused on genetics. And I realized that genetics would be a way for me to really understand at the core what caused a lot of different human diseases. So while I was at Boston Children's Hospital, I became involved with identifying proteins that lead to neuromuscular disorders. I also did some gene mapping of new disorders. And I realized that, once I went from the research to patient care, I really wanted to know, what's next for these patients. And a lot of the patients I would see and diagnose in clinic, I couldn't really treat. There were no treatments available. So I had an opportunity to go to industry. I went to a company called Genzyme, which focuses on treatments of rare diseases. And it was there that I really became a drug developer. I really value my time. I was at Genzyme. I learned how drugs get developed, and especially for small patient populations, because in genetic diseases, a lot of the patient populations are quite small, on the order of thousands of patients. So it's really a very different skill set. And when I went to Genzyme, I admitted I didn't know anything about drug development. And they said, well, we know all about drug development. We don't know anything about these, really strange, esoteric genetic diseases. Can you help us, better understand when we're developing a drug, how do we show that the drug is actually working? And so, I was at Genzyme for a number of years, worked on several drugs that made it all the way through to drug approval and that patients are benefiting from now. After Genzyme, I started really thinking, it's nice to develop a drug that helps patients, but many of the drugs that were available were injectable that required treatment either every week for a few hours or every couple of weeks. So I started thinking about one-time treatments like gene therapy and gene editing. So I went to a little startup company called Editas Medicine that focuses on CRISPR-based genetic medicines. Was involved with a clinical trial to treat a genetic form of blindness while I was there. And as the company started to get more into oncology, I decided I just wanted to really focus on rare diseases. So about 5 years ago, I started consulting, which means that I give lots of advice to all different groups of people. And most of my clients are small biotech companies that have a technology that they want to apply to genetic diseases, but they need some help understanding what diseases would be the best fit for their technology. And then once it's decided upon what those diseases are, they need help in designing clinical trials that would actually show the drug is working and that it's safe. And many of you may know that when it comes to regulating drugs, it's the Food and Drug Administration that oversees not only approved drugs, but also investigational drugs. So we have to work with the patient community, the treaters, usually people like Amy and Brian and Michelle, who are actually seeing these patients, to make sure that when we design the clinical trial that we're asking the right questions and choosing the right endpoints to demonstrate the drug is working. And then hopefully once the trials end, we go to FDA with positive data. We have discussions with them about whether or not the drug can be supported for an approval. And if so, then it gets approved and then patients benefit from treatment. So I find it very gratifying to use my scientific knowledge to try to develop new treatments for patients. And then I also have the medical background to understand how the drug is working within the body. Is it doing what it's supposed to do, what we call target engagement? Is it getting to where it's supposed to go? And ultimately, does it produce the types of changes that we would predict the drug would do when given to the body? So most of my time I spend consulting, probably like 80% of my time. And then the rest of the time I fill in with different activities. I sit on a what's called a DMC, a data monitoring committee. This is a external committee of a small group of experts in the field of drug development or statistics that work with companies to ensure the safety of the clinical trials. So we hear about all the adverse events, the side effects of the drugs as they're being developed, and the companies will convene meetings with us to get our advice on how to best deal with these adverse events and try to mitigate them or prevent them. I also work closely with a few different patient organizations that have raised money to fuel research into the cause of the disorder and potential treatments. So I help them think about what the next step is that needs to take an idea to become a drug. I'll just relay one story before I wind up. When I was a grad student over 40 years ago, one of my lab rotations was to learn how to purify an enzyme. And the enzyme was called hexosaminidase, and the tissue was from placenta. So being in San Diego, I used to get on my bicycle and ride over to the local hospital to the maternity ward and collect placentas and put them in an igloo container and bring them back to the lab and put them through a meat grinder and purify out this enzymatic activity. And during the time that I was there, I didn't really know much about the enzyme. I just was really focused more on how to purify it. But it turns out that when hexosaminidase is deficient, it can cause a disease called Tay-Sachs disease. And 40 years later, when I was at Genzyme, we had a small molecule that we thought might be effective for Tay-Sachs. And so I became friendly with the patient community. And after I left Genzyme, they invited me to join their board of directors for the National Tay-Sachs and Allied Diseases Group. So I head up their research committee and attend a meeting with families that's coming up next month. There's about 100 families with children that have Tay-Sachs disease that attend, and it's really just a great opportunity to go from the bench to the bedside, and then to see people in their lives, and hopefully, just persevering and staying at it. You know, these diseases can be very difficult. They are very difficult to treat. The families have to have a lot of patience. The researchers have to have a lot of patience, and we just need to keep persevering. So I'll just close with that anecdote. You never know when things will come full circle. I never imagined purifying an enzyme over 40 years ago would be a connection that means so much to me today. So, just treat every experience as a learning experience, even if it's an experience that you don't like, then at least you can say, I don't like doing this. And then it will be much more obvious when you choose something that you do like. You'll just feel it in your gut very differently.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Cox, for sharing your experience, and I think kind of showing us lots of different ways in which a career in genetics can play out over time and evolve over time. I'm now going to invite Dr. Michelle Spencer-Manson to hop on and introduce herself and share her story of kind of journey through into the field of genetics and how kind of the work she's doing every day.
Hello, everybody. I am overwhelmed by the number of people who are on this call, and I cannot tell you how excited I am to see this many people who potentially could be interested in genetics. So I am Michelle Spencer-Manson. I am a clinical geneticist at Yale. I have been at Yale now for a decade. So came back, grew up in New England, went down south for a while and came back. So I can tell you a little bit about how my journey to get here and how it all turned out. So I went to medical school in Massachusetts. I went to UMass Medical, and in there got really interested in the field of genetics, but wasn't really where I actually thought I would go. Actually, I will tell you, I started medical school thinking I'd be a surgeon. A couple of mornings of getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning and going into pre-round and all the long hours quickly convinced me that was not my calling. Debated between pediatrics and internal medicine, and then actually went into internal medicine thinking I would be an oncologist. Throughout my training, I saw a number of genetics patients. I saw someone with Noonan syndrome. I had an adult with Noonan syndrome. I had an adult with mitochondrial disease. I started seeing somebody with OTC deficiency and realized this was really kind of a very fascinating, cool field. Got progressively more interested in kind of rare disorders, and ultimately did my medical genetics residency and then my medical biochemical fellowship all at Duke. And then I ended up coming to Yale about 10 years ago. My area of expertise is in metabolic medicine. So I do a lot of inborn errors of metabolism. Particularly, I focus on neurogenetics. So I do a lot of work with both children and adults with, seizures, developmental disabilities, neuroregression, things of that nature. And my particular passion is around neuromuscular diseases. So I work with our MDA clinic. A lot of my research is focused around there between clinical trials and looking for novel variants and treatments and stuff. I am not a basic science researcher. I am a clinician. So a lot of what I do is clinical trials, but also provide clinical support for people for MDs or MDs, PhDs who are doing more translational work. And that has kind of worked very well for me. I had at one point been in the physician scientist track, but ultimately ended up leaving that because, and part of the reason I have a passion for neuromuscular disease is my son has congenital myasthenia. Fortunately, a type that responds to treatment, but when on a long diagnostic odyssey to kind of get from point A to point B. And that is kind of how I got interested in neuromuscular disease, and also kind of why I chose a more clinical career that gave me the flexibility to take care of some of his needs. So that's kind of where kind of how I got from point A to point B. I will tell you, more than 20 years in healthcare, I still love my job. And I think that is something you will not find a lot of physicians out there still saying. It is very interesting all the time. I never get up and say, oh my God, I don't want to see my 455th chest pain or this and that. And not to say I think anything you do in healthcare, you're doing meaningful work that's taking care of patients. But I think I really love the fact that we see a lot of variety. We see a lot of interesting disorders. And we're making meaningful impacts. We have very close relationships with our families. Many of our families have seen multiple doctors waiting to get a diagnosis. They mostly have rare diseases. And so you become kind of the expert in a number of rare diseases. And that's kind of a very fun, a fun thing to do, because you really get to have meaningful relationships with your patients, where they become, they trust you, you trust them. Clearly, I wish everybody was healthy. Nobody had any medical issues, but if they do, you can really be a source, I feel like, of support and help for that family. So that's some of the things I really like about that. My day-to-day, so I wear a number of different hats. So I talked to you a little bit about my clinical work, because I will say the thing that gets me up in the morning is helping patients. So I do clinic, three times a week, and see patients, and I really like that part of it. And there's a lot of other stuff we do in between talking to patients. We see patients with inborn errors of metabolism. We're looking at labs. We're readjusting their formula. I'm answering questions. I'm writing letters. I'm doing prior authorizations. All the other pieces that kind of are there to help and support them in between. So that's kind of one piece of what I do during the day. Then I run a number of clinical trials, and then work with other people. Again, I am not a PhD, but I have some fantastic PhDs that I partner with. And that's actually another pathway. And I think several people here are on this thing are MD PhDs who have done in the lab clinical work. And so all of these people could do their own clinical pieces, but I think there's only so many hours in the day. So I think partnering there can be really, really helpful. And for some people who just don't want to do the clinical piece because they are very invested in their lab, and that's taking up a lot of time, it's a great way to partner together to kind of work on things. And I think that's one of the other things I really love about genetics. It's highly collaborative. We work in a lot of teams. I do a lot of multidisciplinary clinics. I work with the MDA team. I work with a cardiologist, a neurologist, orthopedist, but also dietitians in multiple clinics, physical therapists, social workers, nurses. And so you really get to work with a lot of people as a team to really collaboratively work together to take care of the patients, which is something I love. So I do a number of clinical trials, but also we'll see patients for like our undiagnosed program. I help coordinate our rare disease, our program through NORD. So I do a lot of stuff with arranging patient events and speaking, and we're doing a series of my son is a filmmaker now. He's in the middle of film school, and so we're doing some things, shooting films for about genetics, and both for education, but both for patients to tell their story. So that's some of the stuff we do. We have one of my colleagues is working on a new treatment for a rare genetic disorder. I was going to say what it was, but I'm not sure if it's proprietary still. And then when that goes to clinical trial, I will work on running the clinical trial piece of that. I'm working with some of the neuromuscular people on looking for rare variants, doing muscle histopathology to kind of better differentiate what's normal and what's not. So we get to do a lot of cool things, I think, there. Even if you don't want to do just research, there's still lots of ways to collaborate, but there's also, again, I work with a bunch of people who just have these fantastic research careers of finding really interesting and meaningful things that then go back to the patient. And then I have some administrative hats too. I'm the associate chief of clinical operations, so, help with mentoring younger faculty members, making sure our schedules are done, taking care of any things we need to help make things better for the patients. And so I kind of enjoy that as well. I mean, in mentoring genetic counselors and medical students and fellows, and that's a lot of part here. We do teaching at all sorts of levels. We write papers with some of these people. We help them get their career path. And so that's another really, I think, important and wonderful thing about what I do. So, and I will tell you, genetics it's a very warm, close-knit group. We just, and it's constantly changing. I just came back from American College of Medical Genetics in Toronto, which I think a lot of probably other people has called it as well. And there's all sorts of new technology that's going to help with our diagnostic rates and treatments. And there's now gene therapy for things. So, different kinds of enzyme replacement therapies. We're actually actively involved in treatment now. So I have a number of lysosomal storage disease patients I give enzyme replacement therapy to. There's other things like the homocystinuria trial and stuff that we're involved in, like a lot of my colleagues that are on here as well. So there's a lot of different things that you can do around that. And the other thing I would say is, the genetics community has been very supportive for me personally. So my son was younger, had a lot more health issues, and I was able to do all these hats and do all these things here. And I had to put parts of my career on hold, particularly when I was younger, and we weren't clear what was causing his problems and treatment. And there was a lot more moving parts medically. And my colleagues rallied around me and helped me. And then when I was at a point to get back into having a more vigorous academic career and kind of, increasing my clinical load and stuff, people were super supportive. Everybody helped me. So I think that's another really great reason to look at genetics as a career. And the third thing I'll say, it's exploding. We just cannot keep up with all the patients that are there, all the new technologies. You will be on the cutting edge. You will have lots of patients with lots of meaningful relationships going forward. So I'm excited so many people are here. There's multiple career pathways, and I look forward to, I'm happy to reach, if anyone wants to reach out to me at any point, if they're interested, I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you so much. Such a fabulous story, both personally and professionally, on your career in genetics. I'll invite Nicole from Rare New England to jump in for a minute if she wants before we get to some questions.
Hi, everyone. We just noticed that there are quite a few comments on the compensation for attending this program. So if you do have any questions, please refer to the email address that was sent out, and it was included in the flyer, and we'd be happy to answer the question there.
Thank you so much, Nicole.
You're welcome.
I'm going to start with one of the questions I saw pop up in the Q&A, which I think is a really important one to address, and that is that, that one participant is feeling like an MD or PhD is a requisite title to have for a career in genetics. And I just wanted to also talk about some other fields of genetics where master's degree can play out, and how genetics kind of is part of other areas of medicine in which an MD or a PhD is not necessary to practice. So certainly within genetic counseling, genetic counselors are a master's degree. But I also want to bring up the idea of public health. As we're doing more and more newborn screening, there's more and more need for epidemiologists, public health individuals. I work with a lot of people from in the quality improvement world, which are often come through the public health realm. So I think if you're someone who's interested in genetics and thinks patients with genetic disorders are really the population you want to work with, we are seeing more and more ways for people to get involved, including in allied health fields like social work, physical therapy, occupational therapy. And so in all areas of medicine, as Dr. Spencer-Manson said, it's exploding. And so if you're interested in working with patients with rare disease, there are so many ways to get involved. And so if medical school or a PhD isn't the path for you, please continue to work for this patient population. There are so many tremendous families that you would get an opportunity to work with. So we can certainly talk a little bit more about that if people have questions, or if any of my other panelists would like to add anything to that.
I'll just chime in to say that we have nurse practitioners and physician assistants are both used in multiple programs across the country. So if you want to get a master's degree, those are both options. And genetic counselors are really integral parts of the team. So although we don't have any of them on here today, we have actually I see my Boston Children's colleagues took away my favorite nurse practitioner from me. She's
Sorry
very
about that.
she's very happy. She's very happy up there. But we have a fantastic PA with us here. We've had many nurse practitioners in the PA, and we have a lot of really amazing genetic counselors, all of whom, if you're interested in master's programs, I know would be happy to share their journey, and they are integral parts and very important parts of the genetics team and take care of the patients in the same way we do.
Yes, absolutely. I do think that, we talk a lot about a team base in genetics, and I think that's really key, is it's not just one person, it's this whole team of individuals who go into patient care. And so I do think for people who are interested in the field of medical genetics, but the path there can feel long. There are definitely lots of ways to be part of that. Additionally, there are now a lot of combined programs for people who do go into medicine and want to kind of know genetics is their field and they want to get to it as quickly as possible. There are a lot of combined residencies now that are relatively new in our field as well. Now I'll ask just some other questions that have come up in our prior career fairs that I think are really great. I think we've heard a little bit about what happens on a typical day. I think in terms of, I think we always get some questions about what do you think are the most exciting advances in the field of genetics. So I don't know if anyone would like to talk about kind of the timeline for bringing some of these therapies to the clinic, or what you see as kind of some of the most exciting things recently.
I'll start. I think gene therapy, gene editing is really exciting. There are diseases that cannot be treated by any other way, and now we have a technology that can address them. One of the most common forms of gene editing is called CRISPR, and that was only discovered in 2012. And 11 years later, we had the first approved drug for sickle cell disease based on gene editing. So what I would say is what was really exciting 5 years ago is like almost out of date. And genetics is moving so quickly. You do have to ask that question every year, it seems, about, what is most exciting. But I'm a little biased, but from a drug development point of view, I think, to have a treatment that you administer once and that could treat the patient for the rest of their lives is really amazing.
And to follow up on that, in terms of, there's a question about funding rare disease therapies, and what do you see as some of the challenges in treating small numbers of patients?
Yeah, so it's kind of a double-edged sword. There's a lot of common diseases that you could imagine companies would love to develop a treatment for, like Alzheimer's disease. But some of these diseases are really complex, especially if they don't have a specific single genetic component driving it. And that's why there's been a kind of a switch over the last 20 years with a lot more emphasis on developing treatments for rare diseases, because once we know what the gene is that's causing a disease, there's usually kind of an obvious therapeutic approach that is suggested, by the disease, whether it's gene therapy, enzyme replacement therapy, small molecule, antibody. And so the success rate is about twice as high for rare diseases as it is common diseases to get a drug approved. That being said, there's kind of a sweet spot for rare diseases. If it's so rare that you have difficulty enrolling a trial and difficulty even getting investment dollars or companies interested in developing a treatment because there'll be so few patients that they can charge for the treatment, then we call those like ultra rare diseases, where maybe there are the hundreds to low thousands of patients. Diseases like sickle cell, it's probably 100,000 sickle cell patients in the country. Cystic fibrosis, Duchenne muscular dystrophy, these are all relatively common genetic diseases. They still all qualify as rare diseases, but they're ones where companies can, consider more easily how do they make their investment back. So I think the real challenge is for, the large group of the 7,000 diseases you mentioned that probably have only tens or hundreds of patients. How do you develop treatments for them? We have a system in place with the FDA that typically involves about 10 years worth of drug development from, manufacturing standards to doing toxicology studies in animals to doing clinical trials. And it's just not feasible if your patient population is only going to be 10 or 50 patients. So, FDA is aware that there is this challenge. There are people like Tim Yu at Boston Children's that are trying to develop treatments for individual single patients. But I see that as being probably the biggest challenge because they're so rare. You have to scour the earth literally. So a lot of our trials are involve multiple sites in multiple countries. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cox. I think, Dr. Scacco, I'm going to direct this question to you because we do hear this a lot from students who are undergrads or just starting in medical school, and they are curious about how to find opportunities to work in the field of genetics, even during their undergraduate. Do you have any advice for students who might be motivated to learn more as a way of helping decide what their next steps might be, maybe while they're in school or during gaps between educational opportunities?
There are so many meaningful volunteer experiences. Genetics isn't just confined to hospitals. People with lived experiences are out there. And I would say if you're in high school, one opportunity is to be involved in a program called Best Buddies if you're in the United States. So if you Google Best Buddies, you find that these are programs in high schools where you could run, where you become a partner and a friend and a buddy with someone who is neurodiverse. And it's there you'll have a front row seat at getting to know someone with a genetic diversity. There are also many disability-based organizations and genetic-based organizations likely in your backyard. Seek out, for example, ARCs. ARCs are these umbrella organizations for disability groups, and you could volunteer there. If you're looking for a disability specific, there are autism groups, there's Down syndrome groups, etc., and they're all looking for good volunteers. So I think that's a great way to have a front row seat. And then if you're interested in what is life in the like of one of us, you could always reach out to physicians in your area asking if you might be able to shadow for the day. I think there's no way of knowing what it looks like than to shadow. Every hospital has their own rules and regulations and paperwork, but check in with your local physicians and see if there might be a shadowing opportunity.
Wonderful. And I'm going to direct this question to Dr. Spencer Manson. You mentioned being, kind of crossing over disciplines, being involved in both neurology, genetics, neurometabolic. If a student feels that, genetics is the wave of the future, but maybe they want to specialize in or be focused in another area of science or medicine, how does that play into being able to be involved in genetics, or how does genetics come into those other fields of medicine?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a number of ways of doing that. And again, I'll go back to say that there's multiple pathways into genetics. So what I'm going to say is applicable whether you want to be a genetic counselor, whether you want to be a PA or APRN geneticist, or whether you want to be a physician to some extent. If you find something you're passionate about, you want to find mentors. So I would say that's the important thing for anything. You don't have to be just a geneticist. So let's just say, like, there are people who are board certified in maternal fetal medicine and genetics. So I'm going to take the physician route. They do training in both neurology and genetics. So you can do both training. So that's one thing. Particularly, you want to get very specialized and you want to do research. A lot of people will do that. You can also, I did not do a neurology fellowship, but I did do some extra rotations in neurology when I was in training because I knew that was something I wanted to do. And then I found people to partner with. So again, I'm going to say particularly pediatrics, but yeah, I found this true in adult medicine too. People are interested in collaborating with you. So I am not a neurologist. I am not the best person to diagnose the type of seizures or the type of movement disorder, but I work closely with the neurologist who then, who respects my expertise in, metabolism and genetics. So we work together, and that way the patient gets the best care. So we do a lot of collaborative clinics. I mean, even more non-clinic together is a lot of just kind of open communication. And then, you want to look for ways to make patients better too. So then we will collaborate on research projects, whether they're QI projects or they're clinical trials. A lot of my clinical trials I do with the neurologist. Some of the things of looking at best practices and trying to improve things and doing those kind of projects, we work together. So there's multiple ways of doing that. If you become a PA or a nurse practitioner, gen counselor, they specialize into stuff. So we have counselors who only do prenatal genetics. We have counselors who only do cancer genetics, or people who just do pediatrics, or people who work more as clinical trial associates. So we're there. And the same thing, we like one of our PA now has a lot of interest in vascular malformations. So there's a lot of vascular malformations, connective tissue disorder. My last nurse practitioner that was here that now is in Boston really had a lot of strong feelings towards metabolic, and that's what she decided to do. So I think I always suggest people is try a lot of things, like get to know there, and then continue as you build in your career to focus on the things that you're interested in, unless you just know. I didn't. And so I kind of got there. There was a kind of a more circular route, but if you do, you can just go directly into that too and focus on it as well.
Wonderful. I think that there's been a couple questions just about paths to genetics, and I think I briefly mentioned some of the combined programs, so that are through residency. But I think there were questions about how all of us who are on the panel, what was our defined path into medical genetics? I personally was a pediatrics resident first, and then came into genetics as a late decision in residency, that this was going to be the field for me. But we have others who come through lots of different avenues, including internal medicine, obstetrics and gynecology, and maternal fetal medicine. And if there's anyone else who wanted to share their path, we can let you share that now.
Dr. Kritzer, like you, I think I mentioned during my comments, I went pediatric residency and then genetics fellowship after that. So it's stacked journey.
I took the same route. I think probably the vast majority of people who become interested in genetics go through pediatrics first, because a lot of the genetic conditions occur, or they begin very early in life with onset of symptoms during infancy or childhood. So it's kind of a natural blend to combine pediatrics and genetics. But like Amy said, genetics begins at conception, or even in the adults who are interested in having children. So there's a role, in obstetrics for prenatal diagnosis, carrier screening.
And I think I'm just going to end with one question that we've had gotten before and have received again this time is, there's lots of data in genetics, obviously, in the research world. Do you need to have experience in coding, or if you are someone who's really interested in computer science and coding, is there a place for you in the field of medical genetics?
I think from a research point of view, bioinformatics, and big data, is a huge field. The human genome is 3 billion nucleotides, and that's a lot of information that, we haven't even cracked the tip of the iceberg on what it all means. So there's definitely, from a research standpoint, bioinformatics, a lot of information.
So I will say, as someone who could barely turn my phone on most of the time, You can absolutely, I mean, first say you can be a geneticist without having any idea how to program or code or anything like that if you want to. And I am living proof of that. On the other hand, we have Michael Leek, who is one of my colleagues here and is fantastic. He's a PhD geneticist, but he actually started off life as a computer programmer and ended up becoming a geneticist after he got diagnosed with muscular dystrophy. And he shared this publicly, so I feel comfortable multiple times, feel comfortable doing that. And he actually developed some of the main databases we use for analyzing genetic variants. So if you love computers and want to do that, I think there is a million different applications. And also just go off on a slight side tangent though, but my son is in LA. He's in film production school, but his second major is in computer science and programming. And so like he's going to use that programming degree to do like CGI and animation. So I think programming, you could almost put that with any field right now. Computers, big data, you know, the ability to manipulate data is in almost every field, and bioinformatics is exploding. We can't hire them fast enough. You could definitely do both.
Wonderful. Well, I'd just like to thank everybody who came out today to join us and hear from some of my fabulous colleagues from across the New England area, as well as our representatives from Rare New England. I'll invite Nicole back on to close us out.
Thank you so much, Amy, and thank you as well to Dr. Cox, Dr. Scott Coe, and Dr. Spencer Manzin for being here with us tonight. And thank you so much to all of our attendees. We are so happy that you joined us, and we hope that we see you again. We'll be sending everyone various, information on different opportunities that should help you in your career decision making, and hope that we sparked some interest in the field of genetics as a career. So thank you all again very much from the bottom of our hearts for being here, and we hope to see you again. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks for organizing this.
Of
Bye-bye.
course. Thank you for being here.